I'm Sarah Miller, 38 years old, and my husband of 8 years just told a judge that I was nothing more than a parasite who contributed zero to his success. Before I tell you how a single piece of paper made a room full of high-priced lawyers gasp in horror, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I want to see if anyone else has ever felt like they were invisible in their own marriage. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B was set to freezing, but I was sweating. Not the kind of sweat you get from a workout, but that cold, clammy moisture that coats your skin when you know you are cornered. I sat at the heavy oak table, my hands folded so tight my knuckles were white. I was trying to hide them. My hands were rough, the skin dry and cracked around the fingernails from years of handling harsh industrial dish soap and carrying scorching hot plates. Across the aisle, my husband, Dr. Mark Miller, looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine. His navy blue Italian suit fit him perfectly, hugging his shoulders just right. He wasn't sweating. He was checking his watch, a Rolex Submariner that cost more than I made in 6 months at the diner. He looked bored. Like this was just another administrative task he had to get through before his tea time at the country club. Next to him sat his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. A man with hair so slicked back it looked like a helmet, and a voice that dripped with condescension. "Your Honor," Sterling said, pacing in front of Judge Stevens. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was furniture. The facts are simple. My client, Dr. Miller, is a distinguished cardiothoracic surgeon. His income, his assets, and his reputation are the result of his own brilliant intellect and tireless work ethic. He pulls 16-hour shifts saving lives. He is a man of science, of high standing. Sterling paused for effect, turning slightly to gesture at me with a pen, like he was pointing at a stain on the carpet. Mrs. Miller, on the other hand, has held unskilled positions throughout the marriage. A waitress. A cleaner. A cashier. While these are honest jobs, they are hardly the foundation of Dr. Miller's empire. She has contributed nothing to his professional development. No intellectual property. No business acumen. In fact, her lack of ambition has been a significant emotional burden on my client. I felt bile rise in my throat. Lack of ambition. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and scream that my ambition was the only reason Mark wasn't managing a gas station right now. But I couldn't. My lawyer, Maggie, squeezed my knee under the table. Maggie was my best friend since high school. She wasn't a fancy corporate shark like Sterling. She did family law for regular people. She wore a suit she bought at Macy's on sale, and right now, she looked furious. "Hold it together, Sarah," Maggie whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let him dig the hole." "We are proposing a settlement," Sterling continued, sounding generous, like he was offering a treat to a dog. "Dr. Miller is willing to offer Mrs. Miller a one-time payment of $5,000 to help her transition to a life more suited to her capabilities. She keeps her 2012 Toyota Corolla. He keeps the house, the investments, and the retirement accounts. It is a clean break. Fair and equitable given the vast disparity in their contributions. $5,000. 8 years of my life. 6 years of working 3 jobs. 6 years of eating ramen noodles so he could have textbooks. 6 years of sleeping 4 hours a night. All valued at $5,000. Judge Stevens, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked over her spectacles. $5,000? For an 8-year marriage? It reflects the value she brought, Your Honor, Mark spoke up. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was smooth, confident. The voice that charmed patience. I built this life. I studied until my eyes bled. I took the exams. I did the residency. Sarah just existed in the background. She's a simple woman. She doesn't understand the complexities of my world. Honestly, Your Honor, giving her more money would be irresponsible. She wouldn't know how to manage it. He turned his head and locked eyes with me. For a second, the mask slipped. He didn't look professional. He looked cruel. He leaned in slightly, just enough so only I could hear him across the short distance of the aisle. "You don't belong here, Sarah," he whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. "Look at you. You're wearing a polyester suit. You smell like fryer grease. You're just a waitress. I need a wife with class. Just take the money and go back to the trailer park where you belong." My heart stopped. Then it hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The disrespect. The absolute rewriting of history. It wasn't just that he was leaving me. It was that he was trying to erase me. He wanted to pretend that the ladder he climbed to get to the top wasn't built out of my bones. I looked at Maggie. She nodded, a small, sharp movement. It was time. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I reached down into my battered tote bag, the one with the frayed strap, and pulled out a plain, yellow manila envelope. It wasn't thick. It wasn't impressive. But it felt heavy in my hand. "Your Honor," I said. My voice shook a little, then steadied. "I may be a simple woman. I may just be a waitress. But I kept receipts." The room went silent. Mark frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his perfect forehead. "I have evidence I would like to submit," I said, standing up. My legs felt like jelly, but I walked toward the bench. "Regarding the contribution to Dr. Miller's degree." I handed the envelope to the bailiff, who handed it to Judge Stevens. Mark leaned over to his lawyer. "What is that?" I heard him hiss. "What does she have?" "Probably some love letters or birthday cards," Sterling scoffed, loud enough for me to hear. "Desperate sentimental garbage." I sat back down. I watched Judge Stevens open the metal clasp. I watched her slide out the single, laminated piece of paper inside. I watched her eyes scan the document. I saw her eyebrows shoot up. Then, she stopped. She read it again. She looked at Mark. She looked back at the paper. And then, the most terrifying and wonderful thing happened. Judge Stevens started to laugh. To understand why she was laughing, you have to understand where we started. You have to go back 8 years. We weren't in a courtroom with mahogany panels. We were in a basement apartment in Chicago that smelled like mildew and boiled cabbage. The rent was $600 a month, and we still struggled to pay it. I was 20 years old. I was a math major at the university on a partial scholarship. I was good with numbers. I loved them. They made sense in a way people didn't. I dreamed of being an actuary, maybe working in finance. Mark was 22. He had just gotten into medical school. It was his dream. It was his parents' dream, though they couldn't help him pay for it. They were good people, but they had no money. I remember the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday in November. It was raining, a cold, miserable sleet that hit the windows like gravel. I came home from my part-time library job to find Mark sitting on the kitchen floor. The linoleum was peeling in the corner. He wasn't studying. He was sobbing. I had never seen a man cry like that. He was curled into a ball, his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. "Mark?" I dropped my backpack and ran to him. "Mark, what happened? Is it your mom?" He shook his head, gasping for air. "It's over, Sarah. It's all over." "What's over?" "Med school. I can't go back. The loan application, denied. My credit score is too thin. My parents can't co-sign. They need $40,000 for the next semester and the equipment fees by Friday, or I lose my spot. I'm out." He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "I'm going to be a nobody, Sarah. I'll be working construction with my dad for the rest of my life. I'm so sorry." My heart broke for him. I knew how much this meant to him. He was brilliant. He was meant to be a doctor. I looked around our tiny, sad apartment. We had nothing. There has to be a way, I said, smoothing his hair back. There isn't, he choked out. Unless I find a rich uncle or win the lottery in the next 3 days, it's done. I went quiet. My mind started racing. Numbers. I was good with numbers. I had money. Not mine, really. My grandmother had passed away the year before. She had left me a small trust fund, intended for my own tuition and maybe a down payment on a house one day. It was exactly $45,000. It was my safety net. My future. I looked at Mark. He was the man I loved. We had promised to be a team. I have the money, I whispered. Mark froze. What? My grandma's inheritance. It's almost exactly what you need. He sat up, wiping his nose on his sleeve. No. Sarah, no. That's your school money. That's your degree. You can't. I can take a break, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I can work. I can wait tables. I can support us while you finish. Then, when you're a doctor, you can pay for me to go back. We take turns. We're partners, right? He stared at me like I was an angel. He grabbed my hands and kissed them over and over. Sarah, are you serious? You would do that for me? Yes. I swear to you, he said, his voice shaking with intensity. I swear on my life, Sarah. If you do this, I will give you the world. You won't just be a doctor's wife. You'll be the reason I'm a doctor. We will be rich. You'll never have to work a day in your life once I graduate. I will pay you back 10 times over. I believed him. God, I was so young. I believed him completely. But I wasn't stupid. I was a math major. I had a pragmatic streak. The next day, before I went to the bank to wire the money, I called my Uncle Jerry. Uncle Jerry wasn't a lawyer, but he was a notary public and a man who didn't trust anyone. You're giving him the whole nut? Jerry asked, chomping on a cigar. Girl, you're crazy. Love is grand, but divorce is expensive. We aren't getting divorced, Uncle Jerry. We aren't even married yet. Even worse. Listen to me. Write it down. Make it a contract. If he loves you, he'll sign it. If he hesitates, you keep your money. So, I typed it up. A promissory note. Mark didn't hesitate. He was so relieved to get the money he would have signed a deal with the devil. We sat in Uncle Jerry's office, the air thick with cigar smoke. Mark read the paper. I, Mark Miller, acknowledge the receipt of $45,000 from Sarah Jenkins for educational expenses. I acknowledge that Sarah is pausing her own education to support the household. In repayment, I agree that upon graduation and employment, this sum is considered a direct investment in my future earnings. I'll sign it, Mark said, grinning. He took the pen. He even added a line at the bottom, in his own handwriting. I owe you my life and my career. This is a debt of honor. He signed. Uncle Jerry stamped it. I put that paper in a manila envelope. 2 days later, I dropped out of the university. I traded my textbooks for an apron. I got a job at the Greasy Spoon, a diner 3 blocks away, working the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. Then I worked at a dry cleaner from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. I came home every night smelling like bacon grease and chemical solvents. My feet throbbed so bad I had to soak them in ice water. And Mark? He studied. He studied in the quiet apartment I paid for. He ate the food I bought. He wore the clothes I washed. For the first 2 years, he was grateful. He would rub my feet. He would leave little notes saying, "Thank you, my hero." But slowly, the gratitude started to fade. It became expectation. I remember the day I realized the dynamic had shifted. It was his third year. I had just worked a double shift because rent was due. I came home, exhausted, carrying a bag of leftover burgers from the diner for dinner. Mark was at his desk. He didn't look up. "Hey," I said, collapsing onto the sofa. "I brought dinner." He wrinkled his nose. "Burgers again?" "Sarah, I'm trying to keep my cholesterol down. Can't you afford to buy some salmon or something? And you smell like old onions. Go shower before you sit on the furniture." I looked at him. I was paying for the furniture. I was paying for the salmon he wanted. "I'm tired, Mark," I said. "We're all tired, Sarah," he snapped, turning a page in his anatomy book. "Some of us are doing brain work, and some of us are just carrying plates. Let's have some perspective." That was the first crack. I should have seen the canyon coming, but I just went to the shower and scrubbed my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the smell of the sacrifice I was making for him. The transformation wasn't overnight. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing down a stone. After 4 years, Mark graduated. I sat in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. I wore a dress I bought at a thrift store because we had spent our last spare dollar on his custom-fitted stethoscope. When he walked across that stage, I felt like we had done it. "We did it," I whispered to myself. But at the graduation party, things were different. Mark was surrounded by other doctors, professors, and wealthy families. I walked up to him, holding a plastic cup of cheap punch. I put my hand on his arm. "I'm so proud of you, honey." He flinched. Just a tiny bit, but I felt it. He pulled his arm away, pretending to adjust his tie. "Oh, Sarah," he said, his voice tight. He turned to the group of people he was talking to. They were all wearing silk and linen. "This is Sarah." He didn't say my wife. He didn't say the woman who put me through school. Just Sarah. "Nice to meet you," a woman said. She was tall, blonde, and looked like she smelled like vanilla and money. "So, Sarah, what do you specialize in? Are you in pediatrics?" I flushed. "Oh, no. I work at the diner down on 5th. And I manage the front desk at the dry cleaners." The silence was deafening. It lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt like 2 years. The woman's smile froze. "Oh. How industrious." Mark let out a harsh, nervous laugh. "Sarah is very supportive. She's keeping busy while I get settled. But we have big plans for her to educate herself eventually." He made it sound like I was a charity case. Like I was a stray dog he had taken in. I walked away and stood by the food table for the rest of the night. That was the night I met Veronica Sterling. Or rather, I saw her. She wasn't the blonde woman. She was the one standing in the corner, talking to the chief of surgery. She was dark-haired, sharp-eyed, and wore a suit that probably cost more than my car. She was the CEO of a medical supply startup, B Corp. I saw her look at Mark. I saw Mark look at her. It was a look of hunger. Not just sexual hunger, but ambition. They looked at each other like two sharks recognizing a fellow predator. Fast forward 2 years into his residency, and then his first attending position. The money started coming in. Real money. Mark bought the Porsche. He bought the suits. He insisted we move to a condo in the River North District. "We have to project success, Sarah," he told me when I argued that the rent was too high. "I can't be seen living in a basement." But here was the catch, he kept his money separate. Business expenses, he called it. Investment capital. He gave me a household allowance that was barely enough to buy groceries for the fancy dinners he demanded I cook for his colleagues. I was still working at the diner. I wanted to quit. I wanted to go back to school like we planned. Not yet, Mark said every time I brought it up. We need to be liquid right now. I'm building my reputation. Just another year, Sarah. Keep working. It keeps you humble. Humble. That was his favorite word for me. I stopped being invited to hospital galas. It's just boring shop talk, he would say. You'd be uncomfortable. You wouldn't understand the terminology. So I stayed home. I cleaned the expensive condo. I washed his scrubs. And I waited for the husband I loved to come back. The nights were the hardest. He would come home at 2 a.m., smelling of expensive scotch and a perfume that was musky and floral. Not vanilla. You smell nice, I said one night, sitting up in bed. It's the hospital soap, he lied, taking off his shirt. He looked at me in my old cotton pajamas. He sneered. God, Sarah. Look at your hands. They're so rough. It scratches me when you touch me. Can't you get a manicure? You look like a farmhand. I looked at my hands. They were the hands that had scrubbed floors so he could study. They were the hands that counted tips to buy his anatomy software. I can't afford a manicure, Mark. My allowance goes to the dry cleaning. Excuses, he muttered, turning off the light. Always excuses with you. You have no class. I lay there in the dark, tears leaking into my pillow. I felt small. I felt ugly. I felt like I was disappearing. But the worst part wasn't the insults. It was the feeling that I was being replaced. I just didn't realize how quickly it would happen. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with a lunch order. It was a Tuesday, just like the day he had cried on the floor all those years ago. The diner was packed. It was the lunch rush. I was carrying 3 plates of blue plate specials, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, balancing them up my arm. The door chimes rang. I looked up, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. And there he was. Mark walked in. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her arm looped through his, was Veronica Sterling. The CEO. She looked immaculate. White silk blouse, pencil skirt, red bottom heels. She looked like she owned the place. The diner went quiet. People didn't usually wear Prada in here. My heart hammered. What is he doing here? He never came to the diner. He said it was depressing. I walked over to their booth. My hands were shaking. Mark? I said. What are you doing here? He didn't look at me. He looked at the laminated menu with a look of distaste. Veronica looked at me, her eyes scanning me from my hairnet down to my orthopedic shoes. She smirked. So this is the little helper, Veronica said. Her voice was like crushed velvet. Soft but smothering. We need to talk, Sarah, Mark said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold. Dead cold. And I didn't want to do it at the condo. I didn't want a scene. A scene? I asked, gripping my notepad. Mark, I'm working. This won't take long, he said. He reached into his briefcase, the leather one I had saved 6 months to buy him for his graduation, and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the sticky table. It landed with a heavy thud between the ketchup and the mustard. What is this? Divorce papers, Mark said. Calmly. I'm filing. Irreconcilable differences. The world stopped spinning. The noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the sizzling of the grill, faded into a buzzing static. Divorce? I whispered. Mark, why? We're a team. Veronica laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. A team? Oh, honey. Look at him. She gestured to Mark. He is a surgeon. A star. And look at you. She pointed a manicured finger at my apron, stained with gravy. You are a waitress. You served your purpose. You got him through the hard part. But let's be honest, you don't fit in the picture anymore. She's right, Sarah, Mark said, leaning back. I've outgrown you. It's nothing personal. It's just evolution. Veronica and we operate on a different level. We have a company to run. We have an image to maintain. I can't have a wife who smells like French fries at the fundraisers. I felt tears hot and stinging in my eyes. I worked for you, I choked out. I gave up everything for you. You promised. I promised to take care of you, Mark said, sounding bored. And I am. Read the papers. You get $5,000. That's a lot of tips, Sarah. Take it and go back to school or whatever. Just sign them and get out of the condo by Friday. Friday? I gasped. That's in 3 days. Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem, Mark said. The locks are being changed Friday at noon. Veronica is moving in. Veronica smiled. I'm redecorating. That beige sofa has to go. Can I get a water? Veronica added, looking at me expectantly. With lemon. And make sure the glass is clean this time. I stood there, paralyzed. My husband was divorcing me in the middle of my shift, with his mistress sitting right there ordering water like I was her servant. You're joking, I said. Do I look like I'm joking? Mark snapped. You're embarrassing me, Sarah. Just take the order. Something inside me broke. But it wasn't a break that made me collapse. It was a break that let the light in. The heat of the anger burned away the tears. I looked at Mark. I looked at Veronica. No, I said. Excuse me? Veronica asked. No, I will not get you a water, I said, my voice trembling but loud enough that the tables nearby turned to look. And Mark, you think you've outgrown me? You think I'm simple? Sarah, don't make a scene, Mark hissed, looking around nervously. You want a scene? I grabbed the pitcher of ice water from the service tray. Here's your water, Veronica. I didn't pour it on her. I wasn't that cliché. I poured it directly into Mark's open briefcase, soaking his leather portfolio and his iPad. Mark jumped up, screaming. You crazy bee *****H. My tablet. Consider that the first installment of the settlement, I said. Now get out of my section. You're bad for business. Marge, the manager, came running over. Sarah. What the hell? I'm taking my break, Marge, I said, untying my apron. Actually, I'm taking the rest of the day off. I have to go call a lawyer. I walked out of the diner, leaving Mark trying to dry off his electronics with paper napkins while Veronica screeched about her shoes getting splashed. I walked out into the sunlight, shaking, terrified, but for the first time in 6 years, awake. The adrenaline didn't last long. By the time I got to the condo, reality hit me like a freight train. It was raining again. Of course it was. I put my key in the lock. It wouldn't turn. Friday at noon, he had said. It was Tuesday. He had lied. He had changed the locks immediately to keep me from getting my things. I pounded on the door. Mark. Open the door. My clothes are in there. My grandma's photo album. Nothing. Just the sound of rain and the distant traffic of the city. I was locked out. I had my purse, my phone, and the clothes on my back. I slid down the doorframe and sat on the welcome mat, a mat I had bought that said Home Sweet Home. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I knew who wouldn't judge me. Maggie, I sobbed when she answered. He did it. He really did it. 20 minutes later, Maggie pulled up in her Honda Civic. She didn't ask questions. She just bundled me into the car, turned up the heat, and drove me to her small apartment in the suburbs. Maggie was a pit bull in a cardigan. She made me hot tea, wrapped me in a blanket, and opened her laptop. Okay, she said, cracking her knuckles. No more crying. Crying doesn't pay the rent. We need to assess the damage. Sarah, give me your passwords. Everything. Bank accounts, joint emails, investments. If his name is on it, I want to see it. I don't know if I have access, I said, blowing my nose. He handles the finances. He said I wasn't good with money. Classic narcissist control move, Maggie muttered. Try your old password. Men like him are arrogant. They don't change passwords because they think you're too stupid to look. I typed in the password we had used since college, future Dr. Miller 1. It worked. We logged into the joint savings account. The one we had been contributing to for 8 years. The one that was supposed to be our down payment on a real house, our safety net. I knew there should be at least $100,000 in there. I had been depositing half my tips in cash every week for 6 years. The screen loaded. Balance, $542.18, I gasped. That's impossible. There's a mistake. Maggie's eyes narrowed. Click on transaction history. We scrolled. It was a bloodbath. Withdrawal after withdrawal. Jewelry stores. 5-star hotels in the Caribbean. Designer boutiques. And then, the big one. 3 days ago. Transfer to V Corp Holdings LLC. Amount, $75,000 memo, angel investment, seed capital. Oh my God, I whispered. He gave our money to her. He gave my tip money, the money I stood on my feet for 10 hours a day to earn, to his mistress's company. Maggie slammed her hand on the table. That son of a. Sarah, this isn't just cheating. This is dissipation of marital assets. This is fraud. He took joint funds to invest in his girlfriend's business right before filing for divorce. He said it was his money, I said, feeling sick. He said he earned it. It doesn't matter who earned it. Maggie yelled. It's a marital asset. In this state, it's 50-50. And investing it in a paramour's business? Judges hate that. But. Maggie paused, her face falling. But what? He's going to argue that you didn't contribute financially, Maggie said, pacing the room. He's going to say his high income dwarfs your contributions, so the savings were effectively his. He has Sterling representing him. Sterling is a shark. He'll paint you as a leech. Without proof that you directly invested in his career, it's going to be your word against a respected surgeon. I did invest. I cried. I paid for his tuition. I paid the $45,000 when he was going to drop out. Do you have proof? Maggie asked. A bank transfer isn't enough. It could be argued as a gift between lovers. We need something concrete. A contract. Anything. My blood ran cold. The promissory note. I have a note, I said. We signed a contract. Uncle Jerry notarized it. Maggie's eyes lit up. You have a notarized promissory note? Sarah, that's gold. That's the smoking gun. Where is it? I froze. It's in the condo, I whispered. In the manila envelope. The condo he just locked you out of? Yes. Maggie grabbed her car keys. Get your coat. We're going back. And we're going to break in if we have to. That piece of paper is worth $500,000 right now. We drove back to the city in silence. The rain had turned into a storm. Thunder rattled the windows of Maggie's Civic. When we got to the building, the doorman, Ralph, looked at me with pity. He had known me for 3 years. I used to bring him coffee on cold mornings. Mrs. Miller, he said, looking down. Dr. Miller gave strict orders. You aren't allowed up. Ralph, I said, grabbing his hand. Please. My grandma's ring is up there. I just need 5 minutes. He illegally locked me out. It's a marital home. If you don't let me up, my lawyer here is going to file a suit against the building management for illegal eviction. Maggie stepped forward, looking fierce. I'll have the police here in 10 minutes, Ralph. Do you want that drama? Ralph sighed and swiped his key card. 5 minutes. I didn't see you. We sprinted to the elevator. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I would pass out. If Mark had found the note, if he had destroyed it. I had nothing. I would be the waitress forever. We burst into the apartment. It was a wreck. Mark had already started packing my things, which meant he had thrown my clothes into garbage bags and piled them in the hallway. Where is it? Maggie asked. Where did you keep it? The filing cabinet in the study, I said, running down the hall. We tore open the filing cabinet. Empty. No, no, no. I screamed, pulling the drawers out and dumping them on the floor. It was right here. Under L4 loan. Think, Sarah. Maggie yelled. Did he move it? Did he burn it? I looked at the fireplace. There were ashes. Fresh ashes. I fell to my knees, digging my hands into the cold soot. I saw fragments of paper. Burned edges of bank statements. Old birthday cards. He burned them, I sobbed, holding up a charred corner of a document. He burned everything. He knew. He knew I would look for it. Are you sure the note was in there? Maggie asked, pulling me up. Is there anywhere else? Think. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe. Mark was arrogant. He was thorough. If he found a file marked loan, he would destroy it. But I remembered the day we moved in. I was paranoid about losing that paper. I had taken it out of the filing cabinet because the lock was broken. I wanted to hide it somewhere Mark never looked. Somewhere he wouldn't touch. Where did Mark never go? The kitchen. Specifically, my baking shelf. Mark hated sweets. He hated cooking. He called the kitchen the servants' quarters. The cookbook, I whispered. What? My grandmother's cookbook. I scrambled up and ran to the kitchen. There, on the top shelf, covered in a layer of dust, was an old, battered copy of The Joy of Cooking. The spine was broken. The cover was stained with vanilla extract. Mark wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. It was clutter. I grabbed the book. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Please, I prayed. Please be there. I opened it. I flipped past the roasts. Past the soups. I went to the dessert section. Specifically, the recipe for humble pie, a joke between my grandma and me. There, taped between pages 542 and 543, inside a Ziploc bag to protect it from flour, was the yellow manila envelope. I ripped it open. The paper was there. The notary stamp was still red and crisp. Mark's signature, the signature of a desperate 22-year-old boy, was staring back at me. I owe you my life and my career. I got it, I choked out, tears streaming down my face. Maggie, I got it. Maggie grabbed the paper, checked it, and let out a whoop of joy. Gotcha, you arrogant bastard. Suddenly, the front door beeped. The electronic lock word. Someone's coming, Maggie hissed. It's him. We have to go, I said, shoving the paper into my bra, the safest place I could think of. We ran to the service entrance just as the front door opened. I heard Mark's voice. And Veronica's. I'm telling you, babe, I burned the whole file, Mark was saying, laughing. She has nothing. She's going to come crawling back for that $5,000. Good, Veronica purred. I hate loose ends. We slipped out the back door, into the stairwell, and ran down 12 flights of stairs. My legs burned, my lungs burned, but my chest felt warm where the paper was pressed against my skin. He thought he had burned my future. He didn't know I was carrying a bomb in my shirt. And now, back in the courtroom, Judge Stevens was holding that bomb. Judge Stevens stopped laughing. She took off her glasses and wiped her eyes. But when she looked at Mark, her eyes weren't warm anymore. They were steel. "Dr. Miller," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "Your lawyer just spent 20 minutes explaining how your wife contributed zero to your education." Mark shifted in his seat. He looked nervous. "Yes, Your Honor. That is the truth." "Is it?" Judge Stevens held up the paper. "Because according to this notarized document, signed by you, you acknowledged receiving $45,000 from Mrs. Miller specifically for educational expenses to prevent expulsion. Is that your signature?" Mark squinted. His face went pale. Ghostly white. He recognized the paper. That was a long time ago," he stammered. I was under duress. I was a student." "It gets better," Judge Stevens said, reading aloud. "You also wrote, in your own hand, 'I agree that upon graduation, this sum is considered a direct investment in my future earnings. I owe you my life and my career.'" The judge lowered the paper. "You called this an investment, Dr. Miller. Do you know what happens to investments when a company goes public? They grow. You don't just pay back the principal. You pay the dividends." Sterling, the lawyer, stood up, looking flustered. "Your Honor, this is an antiquated document." Sit down, counselor." Judge Stevens barked. "This is a contract. And Mr. Miller, you are in breach of it." She turned to me. She didn't look at me like a waitress anymore. She looked at me like a partner. "Mrs. Miller, do you have any other evidence regarding financial misconduct?" Maggie stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. We have bank records showing a transfer of $75,000 of marital funds to a V Corp Holdings 3 days ago. We believe this was an attempt to hide assets with his mistress, Ms. Veronica Sterling." A gasp went through the courtroom. Not from the lawyers, but from the back of the room. I turned around. Veronica was sitting there. She had come to watch me lose. Now, everyone was looking at her. Judge Stevens looked at the bank statement Maggie handed up. Then she looked at Mark. "Dr. Miller," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you use your wife's savings, money she earned waiting tables, to fund your girlfriend's startup?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Veronica. Veronica looked away, pretending to inspect her fingernails. It was a loan," Mark squeaked. "It was theft," Judge Stevens corrected. "And in my court, we call that dissipation of assets. And we punish it." She banged her gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "I've heard enough. I am ready to issue a temporary ruling pending a full audit of Dr. Miller's finances." "And Dr. Miller? You might want to sell that Porsche. You're going to need the cash." We had the note. We had the evidence of the stolen $75,000. But Maggie, in her infinite wisdom as a lawyer who had seen too many good people crushed by the system, gave me a piece of advice that chilled me to the bone. "Don't show your hand yet," she said, steering the car through the rain-slicked streets away from the condo we had just escaped. "If we reveal the note now, Sterling will find a way to discredit it before we get to court. He'll claim it's a forgery, or that you coerced Mark. We need to ambush them. We need them to commit to their lie under oath before we pull the rug out." So, 3 days later, I found myself walking into the glass and steel skyscraper that housed the law offices of Sterling, Lockwood and Finch. This was the settlement meeting. A formality, they called it. A chance to resolve things amicably. I wore the only suit I had left that wasn't in a garbage bag, a gray skirt suit I had bought at an outlet mall for Mark's graduation 5 years ago. It was tight in the shoulders and loose in the waist. I felt like a child playing dress-up. Mark was already there. He sat at the head of a mahogany conference table that was longer than the trailer I grew up in. The view from the window was breathtaking, Lake Michigan sprawling out in shades of slate and navy. It was the kind of view that cost $500 an hour just to look at. Veronica was there, too. Of course she was. She sat to Mark's right, scrolling on her phone, looking bored. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that looked softer than anything I had ever touched. "Sit," Mr. Sterling said, not looking up from his file. He pointed to a chair at the far end of the table. Maggie sat next to me. She opened her battered leather briefcase. It looked pathetic next to Sterling's sleek MacBook and mountain of pristine documents. "Let's make this quick," Mark said, checking his Rolex. "Again. I have rounds at 2. "We are here to discuss a fair division of assets," Maggie said, her voice steady. Sterling laughed. It was a dry, paper-thin sound. "Ms. O'Connell, let's be realistic. There are no assets to divide. The condo is in Dr. Miller's name. The cars are leased in his name. The investments are from his earnings. Your client has, what? A savings account with $500? My client contributed to the household for 8 years, Maggie countered. She supported Dr. Miller through medical school. Emotional support is not financial equity, Sterling droned. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It slid effortlessly over the polished wood, stopping right in front of me. It was a check. Pay to the order of, Sarah Miller amount, $10,000. We've doubled the offer, Mark said, leaning back and crossing his arms. He looked benevolent. Like a king throwing a coin to a beggar. 10 grand, Sarah. That's enough to get an apartment, maybe take a class at community college. It's generous. Extremely generous. I looked at the check. $10,000. It was an insult. It was less than the interest on the loan I gave him. It was less than what he spent on Veronica's business trip to Paris last month. And in exchange? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. In exchange, Sterling said, you sign a full waiver of spousal support. You sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding Dr. Miller's personal and professional life. And you agree that no marital debts or assets are owed to you. An NDA? I looked up at Mark. You want to silence me? Mark sighed, a look of pained patience on his face. Sarah, be reasonable. I'm a surgeon. My reputation is everything. I can't have you running around town telling people exaggerated stories about our time together. It's for your own good, really. You don't want to be known as the bitter ex-wife. Bitter? I repeated. Yes, bitter, Veronica chimed in. She finally put down her phone. Her eyes were like ice chips. Honey, look at this room. Look at us. Then look at you. You're holding on to a life you never really belonged in. Mark did you a favor. He dragged you up the mountain as far as he could, but you're heavy. You're dead weight. Take the money. Go find a nice mechanic or a truck driver. Someone on your level. My hands were shaking under the table. Not from fear this time. From rage. I remembered the nights I scrubbed toilets at the office building to pay for Mark's board exams. I remembered eating expired yogurt so he could have steak before his finals. I remembered the promissory note, currently taped to my chest under my blouse. I wanted to throw the check in his face. I wanted to scream. But Maggie kicked me under the table. Wait, her eyes said. Let them dig. We'll take it under advisement, Maggie said calmly, closing her folder. Mark slammed his hand on the table. Advisement? There is no advisement. This offer expires when you walk out that door. If you go to court, Sarah, I will destroy you. My lawyers will bury you in paperwork so deep you'll never see the sun. You'll end up with nothing. Zero. And you'll owe legal fees for the rest of your pathetic life. He leaned forward, his handsome face twisted into a snarl. Don't test me, Sarah. I'm the one who saves lives. You're just the one who serves the coffee. I stood up. I picked up the check. Mark smirked. He thought he had one. He thought I was going to put it in my purse. I held the check up. And I slowly, deliberately, ripped it in half. Then in quarters. I let the pieces flutter down onto the mahogany table like confetti. I don't want your charity, Mark, I said, my voice surprisingly strong. I want what I earned. You earned nothing. Mark roared, standing up. We'll see what Judge Stevens thinks, I said. See you in court, doctor. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. But as the heavy glass door closed behind me, I heard the sound of a porcelain vase shattering against the wall. He was scared. He didn't know why, but he was scared. The morning of the trial, I couldn't eat. My stomach felt like it was full of broken glass. The courtroom was packed. Apparently, a high-profile surgeon divorcing his wife for a CEO was juicy gossip for the hospital staff. I saw nurses I recognized, people I had hosted at dinner parties, people who used to smile at me and eat my food. Now, they avoided my eyes. They sat on Mark's side of the aisle. Mark and Veronica sat at the front. Veronica wasn't a party to the divorce officially, but she was there for moral support. She wore a black suit that looked severe and expensive. She looked like a widow grieving a husband who wasn't dead yet. Judge Stevens entered. She was a woman known for her no-nonsense attitude. She didn't tolerate theatrics. Docket number 4055, Miller vs. Miller, the bailiff announced. Sterling stood up for his opening statement. He was theatrical, pacing the floor, using big words to paint a picture of a saintly doctor trapped in a marriage with a leech. Mrs. Miller, Sterling boomed, pointing at me, viewed Dr. Miller not as a husband, but as a lottery ticket. She waited for him to succeed, contributing the bare minimum, and now she wants to cash out. She claims she supported him. We will show that her contributions were negligible. She worked minimum wage jobs. She paid for groceries. While Dr. Miller took on hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans he is solely responsible for. He paused, letting that sink in. She is a woman of limited education and limited means who is trying to exploit the legal system to secure a lifestyle she did not earn. It was brutal. It was designed to humiliate me. To make me feel small. Then, they called their first witness. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, a colleague of Mark's. A man I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner for 3 years in a row. Dr. Thorne, Sterling asked. How would you describe Mrs. Miller's involvement in Dr. Miller's career? Thorne adjusted his glasses. He didn't look at me. Minimal. Honestly, she was a distraction. Mark would be trying to study or research, and she would be complaining about money or asking him to do chores. She didn't understand the pressure he was under. She was very domestic. Simple. Did she ever contribute financially to your knowledge? No. Mark always paid for everything when we went out. He complained often that he had to carry the financial burden alone because she refused to get a real career. Lies. Absolute lies. I gripped the edge of the table. I wanted to stand up and scream, I paid for the steak you're talking about. I paid for the wine you drank. But I stayed silent. Maggie had told me, the truth is a quiet lion. Let the jackals bark. Then, Mark took the stand. He looked perfect. The grieving, overworked hero. I tried, Mark said, wiping a fake tear. I tried to encourage Sarah to go back to school. I offered to pay for classes. But she lacks drive. She was happy being a waitress. And that's fine, really. But now she wants half of my practice? Half of my hands? It's insulting to the medical profession. And the finances, Dr. Miller? Sterling asked. I handled everything, Mark said firmly. I paid the mortgage. I paid the bills. Sarah's money, honestly, I don't know what she did with it. She spent it on clothes, I guess. Or makeup. It certainly didn't go to the household. I looked at the jury box, except there was no jury. This was a bench trial. It was just Judge Stevens. She was writing furiously on her notepad. Her face was unreadable. I felt a wave of panic. What if she believed him? He was so convincing. He was a doctor. People trusted doctors. I was just. Sarah. Your witness, Sterling said, smirking at Maggie. Maggie stood up. She didn't pace. She didn't yell. She walked slowly to the podium. Dr. Miller, Maggie began. You say you paid the mortgage? Yes. From which account? My checking account. And where did the money in that checking account come from during your residency? My salary. Your residency salary was $45,000 a year. The mortgage on your condo was $3,200 a month. That's $38,400 a year. After taxes, you wouldn't have enough to pay the mortgage, let alone eat. Mark shifted. I had savings. Loans. Loans? Maggie picked up a piece of paper. We have your loan records. You maxed out your federal loans for tuition. You were denied private loans in your second year due to poor credit. How did you survive, Dr. Miller? Did you photosynthesize? A few people in the gallery chuckled. Judge Stevens hid a smile. My wife contributed small amounts, Mark admitted, his jaw tight. For groceries. Small amounts? Maggie asked. We'll get to that. She paused. Let's talk about B Corp Holdings. The room went deadly silent. Veronica stiffened in the front row. You testified in your deposition that you have no significant assets, Maggie said. Yet, 3 days before filing for divorce, you transferred $75,000 to a company owned by Ms. Sterling. That was a business loan, Mark stammered. An investment. With marital funds? It was my money. I earned it. Mark snapped, losing his cool for a second. Dr. Miller, Judge Stevens interrupted, her voice sharp. In this state, income earned during the marriage is community property. You don't get to decide it's yours just because your name is on the paycheck. Mark swallowed hard. I intended to pay it back to the joint account with interest. Really? Maggie asked. Because there is no loan agreement. No repayment schedule. Just a wire transfer to your mistress. Objection. Sterling yelled. Characterizing Ms. Sterling as a mistress is prejudicial. Sustained on the terminology, Judge Stevens said. But the financial question stands. Dr. Miller, you depleted the marital savings account to zero. Why? I panicked, Mark lied. I thought. I wanted to secure our future. Secure whose future? Maggie asked. Yours? Or the one you were planning with Miss Sterling? Mark didn't answer. He just glared at me. A look of pure hatred. Maggie sat down. No further questions for now, Your Honor. We had dented him. But we hadn't broken him. He still had the narrative that I was useless. That I was a financial burden. It was time for me to testify. I walked to the witness stand. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down and looked out at the room. I saw Mark's sneer. I saw Veronica's icy stare. And then I saw the empty space where my life used to be. Mrs. Miller, Maggie asked gently. Tell the court about the early years of your marriage. I took a deep breath. We were poor, I said. Not ramen for fun poor. Real poor. We lived in a basement. We taped the windows because the wind came through the cracks. And did you work? Yes. I worked at the Greasy Spoon Diner. 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then I worked at Spotless Cleaners from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. And on weekends, I cleaned offices downtown. Why did you work so much, Sarah? I looked at Mark. Because Mark had a dream. He wanted to be a surgeon. And medical school is expensive. He couldn't work and study at the same time. He tried, but his grades slipped. So we made a deal. I would be the hands, and he would be the brain. And did you have dreams? Maggie asked softly. I did, I said, my voice cracking. I was a math major. I wanted to be an actuary. I had a scholarship. But we couldn't afford both. So I dropped out. Did Dr. Miller ask you to drop out? He didn't have to, I said. He was crying on the kitchen floor because he couldn't pay tuition. He was going to lose everything. So I did what a wife does. I stepped up. Objection, Sterling interrupted. Relevance? This is a sob story, not financial evidence. Overruled, Judge Stevens said. I want to hear this. Maggie nodded at me. Sarah, Mr. Sterling claims you made no direct financial investment in Dr. Miller's career. Is that true? No, I said. Do you have proof? I do. This was it. The moment. Your Honor, Maggie said. I would like to enter Exhibit C into evidence. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the yellow envelope. The same one I had rescued from the cookbook. The same one that had burned against my skin as I ran down the stairs. I handed it to the bailiff. The room was silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Judge Stevens took the envelope. She opened it. She pulled out the single, laminated sheet of paper. I watched her face. I saw the moment she read the header, promissory note and investment agreement. I saw her read the amount, $45,000. I saw her read the clause Mark had handwritten, I owe you my life and my career. Mark was craning his neck to see. He looked confused. He didn't remember. He had signed so many things, lied so many times, he had forgotten the one truth he had ever written down. Dr. Miller, Judge Stevens said, her voice strangely calm. Do you recognize this document? The bailiff handed the paper to Mark. I watched the color drain from his face. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was instant. He went from tan and healthy to the color of old ash. His hands started to shake. The paper rattled. Mark croaked. Where did you get this? Is that your signature? Judge Stevens asked. Yes. But. He looked at Sterling, panic in his eyes. I thought this was destroyed. I mean, lost. Destroyed? Judge Stevens raised an eyebrow. Why would you want a contract regarding a $45,000 loan destroyed, Dr. Miller? It was a joke. Mark blurted out. It was a romantic gesture. We were kids playing pretend. A romantic gesture notarized by a state official? Judge Stevens asked. That is a new one. She turned to the next page in the envelope. The spreadsheet. And this, Judge Stevens said. A weekly log of expenses. Rent. Tuition. Books. Lab fees. Food. All paid for by Sarah Jenkins. For 6 years. She looked up at Sterling. Counselor, you stated in your opening that Mrs. Miller contributed negligible amounts. This document shows she paid over $200,000 in living expenses and tuition support over the course of 6 years. Adjusted for inflation and interest. She stopped. She looked at Mark. And that was when it happened. That was when the laugh came. It started as a snort. A very unjudicial sound. Then, Judge Stevens put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders started to shake. The courtroom froze. A judge laughing is usually terrifying. But this was the laughter of someone who had just seen the ultimate punchline to a very bad joke. "I apologize," Judge Stevens gasped, wiping her eyes. "It's just, the audacity. The sheer, unmitigated gall." She picked up the promissory note again. "Dr. Miller, you stood here and called your wife simple. You said she had no head for business. Yet, she had the foresight to have you sign a loan agreement with a compound interest clause and a future earnings stipulation that is tighter than most prenups I've seen drafted by partners at top firms." She looked at me. "Mrs. Miller, who wrote this contract?" "I did, Your Honor," I said. "With some advice from my Uncle Jerry. He didn't trust impulsive decisions." "Brilliant," Judge Stevens murmured. Then she turned her gaze back to Mark. It was like a laser beam. "Dr. Miller, let me explain contract law to you, since you seem to have skipped that in med school. You borrowed money. You promised repayment based on future earnings. You defaulted on that promise. And then, you tried to defraud the lender by hiding assets and claiming poverty. It's not fraud." Mark yelled, standing up. He was losing it. "I am a surgeon. I save lives. She just served burgers. She doesn't deserve my money. Sit down." Judge Stevens slammed her gavel. "You are not God, Dr. Miller. You are a debtor. And right now, you are a very poor one." Sterling tried to intervene. "Your Honor, surely we can discuss the validity of the document." "Oh, it's valid," Judge Stevens said. "It's notarized. It's signed. It's unambiguous. And combined with the evidence of the $75,000 transfer to Miss Sterling's company." She looked at Veronica. Veronica was trying to sink into her chair, trying to become invisible. "Miss Sterling," the judge said. "You are not on trial here, but your company is now in possession of disputed marital assets. I am issuing an immediate freezing order on V Corp Holdings accounts until the $75,000 is returned." "What?" Veronica shrieked. She stood up. "You can't do that. We have vendors to pay. You'll bankrupt us." "Then you better get your boyfriend to write a check," Judge Stevens said coldly. "Oh wait, his accounts are frozen too." Mark turned to Veronica. "You said the money was safe. You said it was hidden. You idiot." Veronica hissed back, forgetting she was in a courtroom. "You said she was stupid. You said she didn't have any records. You burned the wrong file." "Order!" Judge Stevens yelled. "One more outburst and I will hold you both in contempt." The room fell silent again. But the energy had shifted. The high-powered doctor and the CEO were now just two squabbling thieves caught red-handed. Mark slumped in his chair. He looked at me. For the first time, there was no arrogance. No contempt. Just fear. "Sarah," he mouthed. "Please." I looked at him. I remembered the man who cried on the kitchen floor. I remembered the man who promised me the world. And I realized that man was dead. He had died a long time ago, suffocated by the ego of the man sitting in front of me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him with the same blank expression he had given me for years. "I'm just a waitress, Mark," I thought. "I can't help you." Judge Stevens took a recess for an hour to calculate the figures. When she returned, the air in the room was thick enough to chew. "Please rise," the bailiff said. Judge Stevens sat down. She put on her glasses. She looked like a teacher about to hand out final grades to a failing class. "I have reviewed the evidence," she began. "This divorce case is textbook. Textbook narcissism and financial abuse. She looked at Mark. Dr. Miller, you viewed your marriage as a stepping stone. You used Mrs. Miller as a ladder, and once you reached the top, you tried to kick the ladder away. Unfortunately for you, Mrs. Miller is made of steel, not wood. She looked down at her papers. Here is my ruling. 1. The promissory note, the court finds the contract valid. The principal of $45,000, plus the agreed-upon interest compounded over 8 years, totals $82,000 owed to Mrs. Miller immediately. 2. Dissipation of assets, the $75,000 transferred to V Corp is deemed theft of marital property. Dr. Miller is ordered to repay this amount to the marital estate immediately. Since the funds were removed illicitly, Mrs. Miller is awarded 100% of these recovered funds as a penalty for the deception. That is another $75,000. 3. Spousal support. Dr. Miller argued that Mrs. Miller has no skills. The court disagrees. However, since she sacrificed her own education for yours, the court awards rehabilitative alimony. You will pay for Mrs. Miller to complete her degree, up to the master's level if she chooses. In addition, you will pay spousal support of $6,500 per month for a duration of 8 years, the exact length of the marriage. 4. Division of assets. The condo, the cars, and the retirement accounts are marital property. They will be split 50-50. However, due to Dr. Miller's attempt to hide assets, I am awarding Mrs. Miller 65% of the remaining estate. Mark's head dropped into his hands. Sterling was scribbling furiously, probably calculating how much of this he would never get paid for. And finally, Judge Stevens said, leaning forward. The life and career clause. My heart pounded. This was the wild card. You wrote that you owed Mrs. Miller your career. While I cannot legally award her half your future salary forever, I can award her a portion of the value of your medical license, which is considered a marital asset since it was acquired entirely during the marriage and funded by her. She paused. I am awarding Mrs. Miller 20% of the valuation of your medical practice. You can either buy her out now for a lump sum of $400,000, or she remains a silent partner entitled to 20% of your profits for the next 10 years. The room gasped. This was unheard of. It was a financial death sentence for Mark Seago. He would have to work for me. Every time he performed a surgery, every time he saved a life, 20% of that check would go to the waitress he despised. This is insane. Mark yelled, jumping up. She can't own part of my practice. She's not a doctor. No, Judge Stevens said calmly. She's the investor who made the practice possible. That's capitalism, Dr. Miller. You should love it. She banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. Walking out of the courtroom felt like floating. I wasn't happy, exactly. Happiness is light. This felt heavy, like the weight of a shield I could finally put down. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, reflecting off the wet pavement. Mark and Veronica were on the courthouse steps. They were screaming at each other. You ruined me. Mark was yelling, his face purple. You and your stupid company. Now I owe her $500,000. I have to sell the condo. I have to sell the Porsche. Don't blame me. Veronica screamed back. Her cool CEO mask was completely gone. She looked frantic. My accounts are frozen, Mark. My investors are going to pull out. I'm finished. You told me she was a nobody. You said she was stupid. She played us. Mark shouted. She set us up. I walked past them. Maggie was beside me, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Mark saw me. He stopped yelling. He broke away from Veronica and ran toward me. Sarah. Sarah, wait. He grabbed my arm. Maggie stepped forward to block him, but I held up a hand. It's okay, I signaled. I looked at him. He looked wrecked. His tie was crooked. His eyes were wild. "Sarah," he panted. "Look, the judge, she was harsh. But we can work this out. We don't have to do the 20% thing. That will kill my reputation. Please. We can get back together. We can fix this." Veronica meant nothing. She was just stress relief. "You're my wife. You're the one who believed in me." The audacity. It was truly bottomless. He thought he could just hit rewind. He thought that because I had loved him once, I would be stupid enough to love him again. I looked at his hand on my arm. The hand of a surgeon. A hand I had paid to train. I gently peeled his fingers off my sleeve. "Mark," I said softly. "Do you remember what you said to me at the diner? You said you needed a wife with class." He flinched. I was angry. "I didn't mean it." "No, you were right," I said. "You do need a wife with class. And honestly, I have too much class to be with a man like you." I adjusted my cheap outlet store jacket. "And about the 20%, I added. I don't want to be your partner. I don't want your money tainted with your ego. Have your lawyer send the buyout check for the $400,000. If you have to sell the Porsche, the condo, and your watch to pay me, well, that's just the cost of doing business." "Sarah, please." "I'm ruined," he begged, tears actually forming in his eyes this time. Real tears. Tears for himself. "No, Mark," I said. "You're not ruined. You're just starting over. Like I did when I was 20. Except you have a medical degree. I just had an apron. You'll be fine." I turned to Veronica, who was watching us with hatred. "Good luck with V Corp," I said. "I hear the cafeteria at the courthouse is hiring. You might need the tips." I walked down the steps. I heard Mark calling my name, but his voice sounded small. Like a ghost. I got into Maggie's Honda Civic. "Where to?" Maggie asked. "The bank," I said. "And then, maybe a steak dinner. I'm paying." 6 months later. I sat in a lecture hall at the University of Chicago. The room smelled like chalk and old wood, a smell I used to dream about when I was scraping gum off the bottom of diner tables. The professor was writing a complex differential equation on the board. "Who can solve for x?" he asked the class. The room was silent. Most of the students were 19 or 20. They looked at their phones or their shoes. I raised my hand. "Yes?" the professor asked, looking at me. I was the oldest person in the room by 15 years. "The limit does not exist," I said. "Because the function approaches infinity as x approaches 0. The professor smiled. "Correct. What is your name?" "Sarah," I said. "Sarah Miller." I wasn't just Sarah the waitress anymore. I was Sarah, the sophomore math major. I had used the settlement money wisely. I bought a small, sunny apartment with a balcony where I grew tomatoes. I paid for my tuition up front. I invested the rest, ironically, in a competitor to Veronica's company, which had gone bankrupt 3 months after the trial. Mark? I heard from mutual friends that he was living in a studio apartment near the hospital. He was working double shifts to pay off the loan he had to take out to buy me out of his practice. He looked 10 years older. He was still a surgeon, still successful on paper, but he was alone. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate takes energy. I needed my energy for calculus too. I walked out of class and sat on a bench in the quad. The autumn leaves were falling, gold and red. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Maggie. "Guess who just got served a lawsuit for malpractice? Karma works fast." I smiled and put the phone away. I didn't care about Mark's downfall. I cared about my rise. I looked at my hands. The calluses from the diner were fading. The burns from the plates were healing. They looked like my hands again. So, that's my story. I paid for his medical degree for 6 years. I gave him my youth, my money, and my heart. And he paid me back with betrayal. But here's the thing about math, equations always balance out eventually. You can't subtract from someone forever without creating a deficit that swallows you whole. Mark thought I was simple. He thought I was a zero. But he forgot that a zero, when placed in the right position, can multiply everything by 10. Or it can divide everything until it disappears. I'm sharing this with you not to tell you that all men are bad, or that love is a scam. I'm sharing this to tell you to keep your receipts. Keep the receipts of your love. Keep the receipts of your sacrifice. And literally, keep the financial receipts. Because you never know when you'll have to prove your worth to someone who refuses to see it. Never let anyone tell you that your contribution doesn't matter just because it doesn't come with a fancy title. The person who holds the ladder is just as important as the person who climbs it. And if the climber forgets that, well, you can always let go of the ladder. Thank you for listening. This is Sarah, signing off to go study for my midterms.